The obvious and easiest thing to do is don't buy fur and don't even support companies that sell it. There are some pretty major fashion designers that are still on the fur trend. So even if you shop online and buy perfume from them, you're still supporting the fur sales. So it's just being conscious. We can vote with our dollar.
Welcome to the Better Life for Animals podcast, where we amplify the voices of animal advocates, sanctuaries, and changemakers working toward a kinder, more compassionate world. Through powerful stories and expert insights, we shine a light on the efforts to rescue, protect, and advocate for animals. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. Every follower helps us reach more people and support animal sanctuaries. Enjoy the conversation.
Nicole Navarro is the founder and executive director of Pawsitive Beginnings, a fox sanctuary in Key Largo, Florida, that provides lifelong homes for foxes rescued from the fur trade and exotic pet industry. Since launching the nonprofit in 2020, she has focused on specialized fox care, humane education, and healing, as well as animal-assisted programs that connect people with the stories of individual foxes to inspire more compassionate choices. Nicole, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, it's a pleasure. Take us back to the beginning. How did you first fall in love with foxes, and when did it hit you that they needed a sanctuary like Pawsitive Beginnings?
So I grew up on a horse farm in Western Pennsylvania, and our next door neighbor was the wildlife rehabber for the area. So from a very young age, I had a very good understanding that wild animals belong in the wild, and companion animals are suitable for being companions to humans. So fast forward, life took me in a lot of different directions, but I landed here in the Florida Keys in 2004. And then in 2017, I rode out Hurricane Irma in Key West, Florida. It was an experience, we'll leave it at that. But in Key West, where our huge county jail here is in Monroe County, under the jail sits an oasis, a sanctuary for rescued animals. There's over 120 animals there, 40 some different species, and they've all been either rescued, confiscated, donated, or surrendered. And so after the hurricane, I reached out to the woman that runs the animal farm and asked if she needed help. Now, typically, a jail isn't somewhere where you can just go and volunteer, but they had evacuated all the inmates for the hurricane, and she stayed behind with all of these animals. And so she gladly accepted my help. And from that day forward, her and I just became really amazing friends. She kept letting me come back to volunteer. And then in 2018, two foxes were surrendered to her. And so this is my first experience up close and personal with foxes. Typically you see them on documentaries or you get a fleeting glimpse of them in the wild because they aren't conditioned nor have any interest in being around humans. So it was very interesting to observe these animals who had just been surrendered from a private home. Thankfully, the person made the right decision and transferred them to a sanctuary where they would get proper lifelong care. And over the course of some months, I would just go sit with them and observe them, and they would observe me, and it was very fascinating. And one day, the female fox came up to me and just sort of looked me up and down and sat down in front of me. And I sort of reached my hand out, and she didn't shy away. And from that day forward, her and I just shared this incredible bond. She would jump on my back and groom me, which is how foxes show affection for one another. And then eventually the male saw that she accepted me, so he would start seeking me out for attention. And then as I did more research, I knew fur farms existed, but never really, dove into it. So I started diving into it. And I got connected with an organization that is able to legally negotiate the surrender of foxes that fur farms deem undesirable. So a fox would be deemed undesirable if they were injured on the fur farm, if their parents hurt them on the fur farm at a very young age, if their coat quality isn't good enough, the fur farmers just discard them. I guess that's the PG term. Um, but as I'm sure most of your listeners know, no animals make it out alive from a fur farm. So the fact that on rare occasion a fur farmer will decide to let them go is huge. So between 2018 and 2020, I spent my time, all my free time, with those foxes in the back of my mind. Like the ideas were forming, like, how can I help? How can I rescue one fox one day to try to make a difference? Because a difference made in one life is better than none. And
Hmm.
so spending 2 years with them, and I'll sort of sidestep here and say I think it's a very important thing to note that I did take the time to spend those years and was not just impulsive about this. I think it's important for anyone that's considering sanctuary work to volunteer, to make sure it's what you want to do, that you understand the species you want to get involved with, because if you can't adequately care for the species that you're interested in helping, then it's still a detriment to the animal. So in 2020, right when COVID hit, I got laid off from my job. I was living back up here in Key Largo by that point. I worked in tourism. So everyone got laid off. The Florida Keys were literally shut down to tourists. And about 3 days after I got laid off, I got a text asking if I was ready to help take foxes from a fur farm, because I had been networking this whole time, getting education from other sanctuaries that had foxes. Um, and my gut instinct just said yes. I knew emotionally I was ready, prepared in a sense, but I had just gotten laid off. So the really amazing thing was people had been watching on my personal social media channels this incredible relationship I had formed with these two foxes. So when I sort of put out the ask for help and made the announcement, I have the opportunity now to save foxes of my own. People just pitched in and started donating, and I wasn't even a nonprofit yet. And that was the first sort of, oh, this is supposed to happen. This is meant to be. So in 2020, it wasn't one. I brought two home in May of 2020, another two adults in July. And in 2021, it was two babies. 2022, it was one baby. 2023, it was a baby. And 2025, it was a baby. The first 6, 7. We're all from fur farms. The baby I got last year was an exotic pet trade, a product of the exotic pet trade. Her parents were surrendered to a sanctuary from a breeding operation, roadside zoo situation. Mom happened to be pregnant when the parents were surrendered. So the sanctuary, getting a surprise litter of kits, asked if any other sanctuaries would be willing to take one on. So in that time, I've unfortunately lost two foxes to various ailments and just broken body conditions from fur farming. But it has been, I've not had any sort of major roadblocks. And that's how I continue to know every day I'm on the right path. So that is the very long story of how I got started.
Well, I think that fur in general is on the decline. I think that the public sentiment is moving away from it, which is, of course, wonderful. But what I'm hearing is that behind all that, the fur trade, fur farming industry is still alive and well. Could
Yes.
you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So a lot of people, my main mission when I started was to educate and raise awareness about the fur trade, especially in the United States, because so many people don't even realize it goes on here. They think that's a other country issue. China, Russia, Poland, thankfully, just voted to phase out fur farming. But people do not think that it is happening in the United States. And while compared to other parts of the world, there may only be about 100 or so fur farms still operating in the United States, but that's 100 facilities where these farmers are mass breeding animals for fashion's sake. I am opposed to any sort of industrial agriculture, animal agriculture. But I think the kicker is, and what sort of clicks with people, and it's how I like to lead into other things when it comes to factory farming, is that these animals are being bred for luxury
I heard you say that foxes are not naturally attracted to humans, and therefore we don't really have a relationship with them like we might have with a cat or a dog.
Right.
So perhaps you could educate us on what it's like. What do you want us to know about what it's like to be a fox?
So I would say being a fox in the wild is natural. They form very strong bonds with one another. Red foxes in the wild have observed practicing monogamy year after year. If a female, for some reason, doesn't find a mate and have a litter, she can come back and help her mother raise the current litter of kits. Um, they have very, very complex emotions. I mean, just from, the 6 years I've spent with my foxes, they grieve, they mourn, they express joy, anger, silliness. And they're just meant to be wild. Um, it's very difficult for me in a sense because I know these foxes should never have even been. Um, but since they were given the opportunity to live, it is my responsibility as their caretaker to provide them everything they need to be happy and healthy. And I do that. And I go above and beyond to do that because that's what they deserve. They've never known the wild. No one in their direct lineage has ever known the wild, but those wild instincts are still there. So I have to make sure they are completely mentally stimulated, properly nourished, properly cared for medically. But to be a fox means not to be in captivity, whether it be on a fur farm or even in a sanctuary. But that's why sanctuaries like mine exist.
I find it's interesting that people have a hard time connecting with something that is meant to be wild, that doesn't have a relationship with us other than what its value is to us, which
Right,
of course we all know it's got nothing to do with that. They're here because they are, and they
right.
have every bit as much right to be here as we are. But I love what you're doing, Nicole, because there's not a lot of opportunity to learn about this and to share, that these foxes also have a very rich inner life and they deserve to be left alone.
And some of my foxes just love people, which is also interesting.
Okay.
And that's why I allow people to come here and see them in person and be educated. It took me about 4 years to get to that point, but I have three foxes that will scream and jump for joy when new people come here. And they are just pawing at the door for us to go in. And those are three that I've had since babies, but it's important to note, and I think, there's a total disconnect when people see foxes, even in the wild, that these are individuals, just like you and I, that have very individual personalities, very individual likes, individual dislikes. Obviously, because I've raised a lot of them since they were babies from a fur farm, um, they're used to people. But I have four other foxes that prefer not to be around people. And the enclosure, their habitat here is set up in such a way that when people come over, the three that want to see people know we're going to go to one side, and the others just stay sleeping where they are. So again, it took me a long time to get to that point. And it's not like I'm open to the public, but I do have individuals, adults and children, that are going through their own trauma recovery journeys at facilities here in the Florida Keys, come to meet them and hear their stories. And it's become a very powerful partnership because, especially with the children, when they come here, there's just this sort of innocence in knowing that they connect with these animals on a much deeper level than anyone could possibly understand. No words are spoken, but that bond is intense. And I have some children that have been coming here for 3 years, that have been in the children's shelter for 3 years. And when those kids come, the foxes are just on it. They are on it. They recognize these children. They will go up to those children first to acknowledge them before getting all excited about the new children. So that in of itself is just proving that these animals are worth so much more than the fur on their back. If they can be in tune with humans, and I mean, it's been scientifically proven that domestic animals can sense cortisol. Service dogs, when, their companion, their human, is about to have a panic attack, they can sense that stress release. And so I've been convinced over the past 3 years with the partnership with the shelter that at least 2 of my foxes can sense cortisol levels.
So Pawsitive Beginnings they're not open to the public per se. However, you do work with children's shelters, or
Yeah,
tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Florida Keys Children's Shelter reached out to me in 2023 because they had seen that I had had women coming here from a holistic treatment facility to see the foxes and hear their stories. And they thought it would be a good opportunity for the children, not only to have, an experience that they likely never would in their entire lives because of the situations that they're in, but also hearing the foxes' stories. And so the very first girl that came here from the children's shelter came from a case of abuse. It was probably one of the worst cases Monroe County had ever seen. It was not just her, it was her and 5 other siblings. I mean, truly horrific. What people do to each other, what people do to animals, what people do in general. But she wasn't talking to them. She wasn't talking to anyone. So the counselor called me and said, "Can I please bring her? Because I know she loves animals because there were animals in the home that she was removed from." And I said, "Sure." And I had just gotten a baby fox fresh from the fur farm, and I brought him out, put him on her lap, and she just gently did this, and he sort of did one of these, and you could just feel the tension flow away from her. For that moment, it didn't make things better. It just made it easier from that moment on, knowing she sort of had a tiny little ally that understood her pain because he was missing his tail from trauma on the fur farm. So there was visible scars there. She had emotional scars, and it was that was the beginning of our partnership with the Florida Keys Children's Shelter, and it's been going strong for 3 years now. And I could name a dozen other stories of instances where children just connect with the animals because of their past.
Are there, is it partnerships like this that help with your uh, financial needs? And are you able to
No,
fundraise? How do you keep yourself going?
so I mean, we are a 501(c)(3), so we rely on public donations. I offer that service to these agencies in Monroe County for free, um, because I believe in the work that they do. I believe in what I've seen when the women and children come here, and it's my way of giving back to a community that has truly welcomed us with open arms. You don't expect a fox sanctuary in the Florida Keys, but it is something I wholeheartedly believe in. Other, local foundations here in Monroe County have seen what we're doing. So I have gotten some grants to help support the foxes when it comes to the women and children coming here. But as far as me charging them to come here, I don't.
So you rely on donations.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
You're listening to Better Life for Animals podcast. Our mission is to amplify the voices of animal advocates, sanctuaries, and changemakers working toward a kinder, more compassionate world. But we can't do it alone. We need your help. First of all, go ahead and subscribe to this channel wherever you're watching or listening. And then get involved by visiting betterlifeforanimals.com. That's betterlifeforanimals.com. Be sure to check out our blog, learn more about incredible sanctuaries, and explore our book section, where 100% of net proceeds from book sales are donated to sanctuaries. Every action you take helps to make a difference. And remember, subscribe to this channel. And now, back to the show.
If you're just joining us, we're having a conversation with Nicole Navarro, and she is with Pawsitive Beginnings. Nicole, you talk a lot about staying true to yourself and leading with honesty. So how do those values that have been tested, what have they taught you?
I have, obviously, as anyone has in life, been faced with decisions or come to a crossroad where, it could be easy to sort of veer off the path. And I can give a great example of it because it just happened 2 weeks ago. So obviously I am against the fur trade. I am against the exotic pet trade. I do not believe exotic animals should be bred at all, but especially for private ownership. And it is way too easy in the United States for people to own exotic animals and then have little to no accountability what happens or is happening to those animals. And 2 weeks ago, someone contacted me and asked if I wanted to take on a baby fox that was born here in Florida. And I started asking some questions and found out that it was from a breeder here in Florida who breeds certain exotic animals and has 2 pet foxes that accidentally bred. And I said, no, thank you. No, thank you. I can't. Fortunately, I do believe another sanctuary took those baby foxes, but it would have been far too easy for me to make up excuses in my head and then water down the truth if I announced this baby fox. And I had to stand firm on my values and my beliefs that in no way, shape, or form will I ever support the exotic pet trade or the fur trade monetarily.
So you have boundaries.
I have strong boundaries.
Nicole, your fox stories have touched so many lives through media and storytelling. So how do you share those stories in a way that honors them and opens people's hearts to foxes?
So the foxes make it really easy for me to do that because they all have such individual personalities. And because I guess you would consider me a micro sanctuary with only 7 foxes, it is really easy to highlight those individual personalities. And people have fallen in love. People didn't realize a fox could have a personality. A people didn't realize that. I don't know if you can see here, but my Fox Reef, I advocated for him to win Best Local Celebrity here in the Upper Keys and ran strong campaigns, and he won 4 years in a row. And I always like to say it's adorable, it's cute, he beat out humans, but there is a much bigger meaning behind that. He beat out humans. He is worthy of titles. These animals are worthy of so much more than they've been given from their beginning. So they make my life easy when it comes to advocating for them because they advocate for themselves. I just showcase it.
For someone who is just becoming aware of the fur or exotic pet trade, what's one meaningful step that they could take to truly make a difference?
I mean, the obvious and easiest thing to do is don't buy fur and don't even support companies that sell it. There are some pretty major fashion designers that are still on the fur trend. So even if you shop online and buy perfume from them, you're still supporting the fur sales. So it's just being conscious. We can vote with our dollar. If people start to see a decline in sales and then over here they see that there are protests going on, there's activists outside the store, it all comes together. There are many forms of activism. Mine is showing a side of these foxes that people didn't even know existed. They can help people. They're not therapy animals by any sense of the word. It's impossible. But they're helping people just by being who they are. There's activists, there's boots on the ground. There's so many things, but the simplest thing that everyone can do, be conscious where you spend your money.
What do you see in your near future for yourself as well as for Pawsitive Beginnings? And what hope do you have for this movement in general?
As you mentioned, the anti-fur movement does have some strong momentum right now with New York Fashion Week just banning fur from the runways. The Emmys, the Emmys banned fur from their awards show starting this year. Hearst Magazines has banned fur from its pages, so Vogue and everything that falls under that umbrella. So I think the movement is headed in the right direction at a very high rate of speed. For me personally, I really try to live by the statement as living one day at a time, just being present in every moment. Obviously, on the back end, I make sure that if anything were to happen to me, the foxes are financially secure and have a safe, legitimate place to go. I wrote a children's book that came out a few months ago. So that's a new way to reach audiences to show that these foxes are worth more than the fur on their back, but in children's form. I really don't plan for these like major things that have happened. They just sort of fall in my lap. And I just feel like that's what walking on purpose does. When you're walking on purpose, the right things, the right people, the right opportunities just sort of cross your path when they're meant to.
Well, that's exciting about your book. Tell us about it and tell us the name of it and what it's about and how we can buy it.
Sure, it's called Reef the Fox Finds His Purpose. And it's all about Reef's beginning on a fur farm, although I don't go into detail about where his life began. But, the illustrations are dark, showing him in a cage, but I don't go into detail. And his journey to Key Largo and then meeting children and becoming their friend. So it was very sweet to write. It's very true. It's very real. It is Reef's life. It is Reef's story, and it's on Amazon. And the great thing about it is, if you just search Reef the Fox on Amazon, it's the first thing that pops up. So
That's wonderful. Well, Nicole, how can we find you and how can we support you?
So the easiest way to find us is by going to positivebeginnings.org, and it's PAW positivebeginnings.org. And then from there, you can find anything. Social media, ways to donate, their Amazon wish list, information about each fox. People can sponsor foxes here, like a virtual adoption type thing that, helps care for their monthly food, parasite prevention, all the good things they need to stay happy and healthy.
Nicole, thank you so much for agreeing to be on our show and informing us all about the beauty that is inside of every fox that so many people I don't think are aware of. So Thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. If you have liked today's episode, please like and subscribe so that we can create a better life for animals.
Thank you for joining us on the Better Life for Animals podcast. Together, we can create a world where all beings are treated with dignity, respect, and care. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. It helps us reach more people and spread awareness about the incredible work happening in animal sanctuaries. You can also share this episode with friends and fellow advocates to keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep speaking up, taking action, and making a difference for the animals.